The mug slipped from my hand before I even realized I had lost control of it, the hot coffee exploding across the marble floor in a dark, jagged stain. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The polished surface of the breaker's grand lobby reflected the mess back at me, reminding me of just how out of place I looked even before anyone said a word. My heart hammered in my chest, not because of the spill, but because of the sentence that had just been delivered to me quietly and efficiently by the clerk behind the counter. Miss Walker, I apologize, but I cannot find your reservation. I see bookings for your family members, but nothing under your name. The words reverberated through me like a cruel echo, louder than the hum of conversation, louder than the clinking glasses from the nearby bar, louder than the piano music drifting from the mezzanine. I felt my pulse rushing in my ears, as if my own body wanted to drown out the humiliation. And then I heard it, the sharp, calculated click of designer heels against marble. I didn't need to look up. I already knew whose shadow was stretching across the lobby floor toward me, my sister Catherine. "Oh, Helen finally made it," she announced, her voice pitched deliberately high, carrying across the ornate space so every guest within earshot would be forced to notice. Each syllable was a dagger disguised in silk. She adjusted the strap of her Hermes Birkin bag with exaggerated care, tilting her chin in mock innocence. "How strange that there's no reservation for you." Gasps and murmurs floated around me. My humiliation was now a spectacle curated by my own blood. Catherine's lips curled into a smile that wasn't just triumphant, it was hungry. She stepped closer, closing the gap, until I could see the smug light in her eyes. Actually, she continued savoring every word. "I only made reservations for our real family. A room for me, my husband and daughter, and one for mom and dad." Her emphasis on real family sliced me open. I turned my head slightly, hoping desperately, hoping that I might find my parents behind me ready to intervene to correct her, to remind her that I was their daughter too. But through the ornate mirrors lining the wall, I saw the truth. My parents were there, yes, but their backs were turned. Deliberately turned. As though if they didn't look at me, I wouldn't exist. As though my suffering were an inconvenience too shameful to acknowledge. The $200 theory dress I had chosen so carefully for Thanksgiving, the dress I thought might make me look elegant enough to belong in this glittering palace, suddenly felt like a costume. A costume that didn't fit one I had no right to wear. I had wanted to blend in, to look like I belonged in the family photographs we always took in lobbies like this, framed in gilded light and dripping in forced smiles. But now I was being cast out, stripped bare in public. "My name is Helen Walker. I am 33 years old, and I am a pharmaceutical research director. I have built my life with my own hands, with 80-hour work weeks, with endless nights fueled by coffee and data, with grit that no one in my family ever bothered to respect. And this moment was the story of how I finally forced them to see the consequences of everything they had done. Because this wasn't the first cut. This was just the moment when the bleeding became visible to everyone else. For years I had been the outlier. The child who never asked for money, who worked 3 part-time jobs while attending college, who graduated not just debt-free, but with a small nest egg I had created from scholarships and careful investments. I had learned to survive on my own because survival was never guaranteed if I leaned on them. My sister Catherine, on the other hand, had perfected the art of living on appearances. She was Instagram perfection wrapped in designer labels. Her daughter Amy posed in matching outfits beside her, her husband always at her side in coordinated suits. But I knew the truth. Last year, when grandfather had been hospitalized briefly, I had helped manage his accounts. I had seen the statements. $30,000 every month funneled directly to Catherine. An allowance disguised as inheritance bleeding into her wardrobe, her daughter's private school tuition, her vacations, her sprawling mansion, and the carefully maintained facade of success she showcased online. Catherine had never once shown up for grandfather when he asked for her. She never sat by his hospital bed. She never sorted through his papers or handled the endless phone calls. That was me, always me. The granddaughter who didn't count. Standing there in the breaker's lobby, something inside me shifted. A line hardened within me like a fracture crystallizing into diamond. I could almost hear grandfather's voice, the one that had always spoken only to me in private, become someone who can stand on her own feet. He had said it with pride. He had said it with love. But he hadn't realized that in showering Catherine with unearned luxuries, he had created monsters. Monsters who had never learned to stand at all. I inhaled slowly, forcing the trembling in my hands to still. I steadied my voice, flattening it into something cold, something that wouldn't betray the storm inside me. I see, I said. Then I'll leave. The words tasted strange in my mouth, but they felt right. I tightened my grip on the navy Ramoa suitcase by my side, the one I had bought with my own salary, not with grandfather's allowance, not with Catherine's schemes, and I nodded politely to the front desk clerk. Their sympathetic eyes followed me silently, acknowledging what they had just witnessed. Without another glance at Catherine, without giving her the tears she so clearly expected, I turned and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked across the marble floor. Each sound was a metronome marking my departure. The lobby had fallen silent. Guests who had craned their necks to watch my public humiliation now turned to watch my quiet dignity. It was the only rebellion left to me. As I reached the glass doors, I caught sight of Amy, my 7-year-old niece. She was fidgeting behind Catherine, dressed in a frothy designer gown that looked more like a doll's costume than a child's clothing. Her eyes were wide, searching for me in the crowd. Every year since she was a toddler, I had brought her a gift for Thanksgiving. This year it was a pearl hair clip chosen not because it matched Catherine's curated aesthetic, but because it was something timeless, something I hoped Amy would one day appreciate as her own. It was still in my suitcase, wrapped with care. Amy's gaze caught mine for the briefest second before Catherine tugged her hand sharply. My throat tightened, but I kept walking. The air outside was sharp and cold, biting against my flushed cheeks as I opened my taxi app. My phone screen blurred as I blinked, but I refused to let tears fall. Not here, not now. When the car arrived, I slid into the back seat and did the only thing that felt right. I dialed grandfather. The moment he answered, I could hear the shift in his breathing. "Helen, what's wrong?" His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension. He knew, he always knew. We never called on holidays. It was an unspoken rule. "I have something to report," I said. My voice was detached, clinical, almost like I was presenting research findings at work. I laid out the facts: the missing reservation, Catherine's declaration that only the real family deserved rooms, my parents' complicity in their silence. I didn't embellish. I didn't plead. I just presented the data. Because I knew deep down that the truth alone was enough. On the other end of the line, his breathing grew heavier. That was the only crack in his carefully controlled composure. When he finally spoke, his words were low, heavy, final. "I understand. I'll handle this from here." I didn't realize then how quickly the world was about to change. Within 15 minutes, my phone was buzzing violently in my lap. 10 missed calls from Catherine, then 15, then 20. Each voicemail grew more frantic, her polished voice unraveling into hysteria. My parents' emails began flooding in paragraphs of justification disguised as scolding. "You're independent now, aren't you? Why not just book your own room? Why make a scene? Catherine has a husband and child, you should understand." Each line was a knife. But they weren't new wounds. They were just old scars being ripped open again. And then amid the chaos of notifications, one new email appeared. The sender, grandfather. The recipients, every member of our family. The subject line was simple: final decision. I remember my breath catching in my throat as I opened it, knowing that whatever was written there would alter the balance of everything we had known. The email began in grandfather's precise, dignified style, the kind of language he had always used in his business letters, where every word was carefully chosen and carried the weight of finality. "Today on Thanksgiving, an incident occurred that severely damaged our family's dignity. The cruel treatment of Helen is an injury to the Walker family name and cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. Effective immediately, I am freezing all financial support to George, Margaret, and Catherine. I must remind you that your luxurious lifestyles are entirely dependent on my support. Those who have lost sight of the family's essence, drowning in vanity and pretense, no longer qualify for such privilege." My hands trembled slightly as I read, not because I felt guilt, but because I could almost hear the sound of the floor collapsing beneath my family. Catherine's mansion, her luxury cars, Amy's private school gone. My parents' retirement plans, their medical subsidies, their dream of an easy life built on grandfather's fortune, shattered in a single paragraph. Even before I finished the email, my phone lit up with Catherine's calls. She was relentless. 5 calls in 2 minutes. 10 more voicemails, each more panicked than the last. Her voice, once dripping with smug superiority, now cracked with desperation. "Helen, please answer. Convince Grandpa. You can fix this. Please, if you ever cared about Amy." Her words dissolved into sobs before the message cut off. I sat in the quiet cabin of the airplane as it lifted through the clouds, my phone vibrating ceaselessly on the tray table. Outside the window, the world blurred into soft white light, muffling the chaos in my lap. My parents' emails began arriving next. Their tone was no longer dismissive, it was pleading. "Helen, this is about our retirement. Could you please talk to your grandfather? The deposit for our luxury community is at risk. We'll lose everything. The medical insurance subsidies will stop. Do you want us to suffer in old age? You've always been so cold, so independent. Why can't you do this one thing for us?" It was the same pattern as always. My needs had never mattered. My pain was always something to be ignored, dismissed, mocked. But when their comfort was threatened, suddenly my silence became cruelty. I stared at their words for a long time, my chest heavy but not broken. Because these wounds, they were not new. I had carried them since childhood. The years of being told I was too serious, too selfish, too ambitious. The constant reminders that Catherine was the one they were proud of, the one they celebrated. Even when I graduated with honors, when I bought my own apartment, when I rose in my career, they only asked why I hadn't found a husband yet, why I couldn't be more like Catherine. Now the truth was finally unraveling in front of them, and they were terrified. I powered off my phone. The silence that followed was almost sacred. The rest of the flight passed in a haze. By the time we landed in Chicago and I reconnected to Wi-Fi, my inbox had swollen with over 100 unread messages. I scrolled through them slowly, deliberately, as if examining samples under a microscope. Each revealed a different stage of their unraveling. Catherine's voice, once haughty, was reduced to panic. "What am I supposed to do? I won't be able to pay the loans. What about Amy's school fees?" My parents' tone shifted from entitlement to raw fear. "We won't get the retirement deposit back. I can't sleep at night thinking about the insurance. Please, Helen, help us." But the one message that mattered most was at the bottom of the pile from Grandfather. His words were blunt, irrevocable. "This measure is irreversible. Consider it the consequence of your own actions. Any objection to my decision will result in the termination of all remaining support." I read it 3 times. The weight of those words settled over me like a cloak of steel. Grandfather had chosen, and for once in my life he had chosen me. That night, alone in my apartment, I made tea and stood at the window watching the city lights flicker against the black sky. Somewhere in that opulent Florida hotel, my family was eating their Thanksgiving dinner without me. The meal would cost $200 a plate, the wine glasses would sparkle, the photos would normally flood Catherine's Instagram. But this year there would be no posts, no staged perfection, because reality had arrived like a storm they couldn't escape. The calls kept coming. Catherine's husband, normally a silent shadow at her side, left a voicemail filled with a bitterness I had never heard in his voice before. He was lashing out at Catherine now, blaming her, spending her obsession with appearances. Cracks were forming in the marriage she flaunted as unshakable. I turned off my phones again. Their voices no longer reached me. Days passed, then weeks. Snow fell over Chicago, blanketing the city in white silence, while my family's world unraveled in Florida. Catherine's once daily Instagram updates, lavish dinners, luxury handbags, exotic vacations suddenly ceased. The last post, a Hermes bag tagged with "Had Dream Lifestyle," now sat frozen in time, buried under comments that felt almost mocking. Emails from my father grew more reflective, stripped of arrogance. "I'm reflecting on our years of extravagant living. We spoiled Catherine too much. We were cold to you. I'm sorry." My mother, too, sent messages tinged with fear. "Our pension alone is nowhere near enough." I never realized how much of our life was borrowed comfort. But it was Catherine's husband who shocked me most. He called, voice flat with exhaustion. I've discovered hidden debts. She kept them from me. Credit cards, loans. We can't maintain this lifestyle anymore. We're considering moving to a cheaper house, public school for Amy. Catherine cries every night. His words rattled in my head long after the call ended. For the first time, the mask had cracked completely. Meanwhile, my life continued steady, secure, even thriving. At work, I was promoted to team leader for a new research project. My salary would rise to $200,000. My investments grew quietly, steadily, free of the chaos my family had chained themselves to. Every night, as I lay in my modest but comfortable apartment, I felt grandfather's words echoing, vanity is for others, savings are for yourself. The divide between us widened with each passing week. Their messages, once constant, grew less frequent. The desperation shifted into resignation. Catherine's last email was brief, a shadow of the flamboyant sister I once knew. Amy will be transferring to public school. She'll take the school bus. I never imagined this life. And then silence. Yet despite everything, despite the humiliation, the betrayal, the wounds that had never healed, I still thought of Amy. The pearl hair clip remained in my desk drawer, wrapped neatly, waiting. I wondered if she remembered our Thanksgiving tradition, if she missed the small moments we shared that weren't about appearances, but about kindness. One evening, as the snow outside softened into quiet drifts, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Catherine's number, but the words were clearly Amy's. Aunt Helen, when can I see you again? I sat with that message for a long time, the tea cooling in my hands. For the first time since the breaker's lobby, my chest ached, not with rage, but with something gentler, a flicker of hope buried under all the pain. I wrote back one word, soon. The message sent, and I stared out at the frozen Chicago night. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a chance. Because sometimes necessary pain is the only way to open the door to something truer. 2 weeks after that, Thanksgiving Chicago was wrapped in its first December snow. The city moved on with its rhythm, commuters hurrying down icy sidewalks, shop windows glowing with holiday displays, children's laughter echoing across frozen parks. To the outside world, life looked festive, alive. But in my inbox, the echoes of collapse continued. My sister's once perfectly curated social media presence had gone eerily silent. Just a month before, she had been posting almost daily photos of Amy at ballet class weekend brunches, with champagne flutes clinking in the background, snapshots of her manicured hand resting casually on the wheel of a leased luxury car. Her captions had been filled with hashtags like dreamlife and blessed, and now there was nothing. Just one last photo, a Hermes bag perched on a white tablecloth tagged at an upscale restaurant, a bag that might very well be sitting in a pawn shop by now. The comments underneath, left by friends and strangers alike, had turned from envy to confusion. Where have you been, Hope? Everything is okay. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Meanwhile, my father's emails grew more frequent, and unlike before, there was no arrogance in his words. Just a kind of weary regret. I think back on the years we spent spoiling Catherine and dismissing you. We believed we were helping her by giving, but all we did was cripple her. And with you, Helen, we were cold. Too cold. I'm sorry. He wrote like a man who had finally realized that his values had been built on sand. My mother's messages were more practical, tinged with panic. We never realized how much healthcare costs without subsidies. We cannot keep living like this. I lie awake at night wondering how we will afford medication. I finally understand the value of what you've been doing all these years. It was almost comical, almost, how quickly they had gone from dismissing my independence to envying it. To them, independence had always been loneliness, selfishness, proof that I didn't care about family. But now independence was exactly what they lacked. They had never learned to stand on their own feet. Catherine's world was unraveling even faster. One evening, I received an unexpected call from her husband. His voice carried the kind of exhaustion that only comes when years of denial finally collapse in a single day. I've discovered debts. He confessed, his words halting. On top of the allowance, Catherine had been hiding credit card balances, personal loans. I didn't even know. I don't know what to do. We can't maintain this lifestyle anymore. We're considering selling the house. Amy might need to transfer to public school." His voice cracked when he added, "Catherine cries every night." I listened in silence because what was there to say, sympathy didn't feel right. But neither did triumph. I felt something colder, more complicated. A mix of vindication and sadness, like watching a fire you didn't start but couldn't put out either. For the first time in years, I realized that Catherine's carefully constructed life had been a performance not just for the world but for herself, and now that performance was over. Meanwhile, my life felt almost eerily steady. I rose at 6, made coffee, bundled myself against the cold, and arrived at the laboratory by 8. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, steady and familiar, as I guided my team through our new research project. When I was offered the role of team leader, it felt less like a surprise and more like a quiet affirmation that the path I had chosen, lonely, though it sometimes was, had always been the right one. My salary was set to rise. My investments were secure. My apartment, though modest compared to Catherine's sprawling house, was entirely my own. I lived within my means, I carried no debt, and I slept easily at night. In the quiet of my evenings, I sometimes heard grandfather's voice in my memory. "Vanity is for others. Savings are for yourself." Words I had once thought were simply financial advice had become something much more profound. They were a way of living, a way of surviving in a world that demanded masks and illusions. Weeks passed, and the tone of my family's messages began to shift again. Desperation gave way to resignation. Catherine's emails grew shorter, less frantic, as though she were too tired to maintain even the appearance of control. "Amy will be transferring to public school. She'll ride the school bus. I never imagined this life." There was no more mention of private ballet lessons, no more updates about new handbags or vacations, just the bare facts of survival. Even my parents seemed to be softening. My father wrote, "We've been living with wrong values for years. Luxury blinded us. We should have been better parents to you. I don't know if we can fix the damage." I read those words 3 times. It was the first time he had ever admitted fault, and yet I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't yet know if I was ready to believe him. It was grandfather's message that struck me most deeply. One evening, his email appeared in my inbox, concise as always. "Awakening to the truth of life sometimes brings pain. But it is necessary pain. Your decision gave them an important lesson." I didn't reply to him either. I just saved the message in a special folder like a keepsake. 3 months after Thanksgiving, as the snow in Chicago began to melt and the first fragile signs of spring appeared, I found myself staring out my office window at Lake Michigan. The waves sparkled in the sunlight, their vastness reminding me of both my smallness and my strength. The pharmaceutical project I led was progressing well. My team respected me. My work mattered. My achievements for the first time felt recognized not by my family, but by the world I had built for myself. And then one day a package arrived from grandfather. Inside was a simple pearl necklace, elegant and understated. The card tucked inside bore his familiar handwriting, a single line, written with the clarity of someone who never wasted words. "True brilliance dwells in those who stand on their own feet." I held that necklace in my hands for a long time, my throat tight. It wasn't about the pearls. It was about the acknowledgement, the reminder that he saw me not as an accessory to the family name, not as the forgotten daughter, but as someone whole, someone strong. By then, my parents had moved from their luxury Florida community to a smaller condominium. My mother wrote that they were slowly learning to live within their means, to cook at home, to pay their bills carefully. Catherine's family had relocated too to a suburban neighborhood where Amy was adjusting to public school. Catherine's social media remained silent, but once in a while I would get an email from her, rare, halting, almost human. "How empty it all seems now, posting just to keep up appearances." Those words startled me. They didn't erase the years of cruelty, but they revealed something I had never seen before, the faintest outline of a woman who might finally be learning. And then the message that changed everything. A text sent from Catherine's phone, but written in the unsteady spelling of a child. "Aunt Helen, when can I see you again? Amy." I read it over and over. My eyes blurred, but this time I didn't fight the tears. They weren't tears of humiliation or rage, but something else entirely, a tender ache, a fragile hope. After a long pause, I wrote back one word, soon, and I meant it. Because maybe, just maybe, the pain we had endured, the fractures that had split us apart, could someday become the cracks through which something true might grow. Spring in Chicago arrived reluctantly, as if the city itself was unsure whether it deserved warmth after the long cruelty of winter. The first green buds pushed timidly through branches that still seemed dead, and the lake sparkled under sunlight that was hesitant but real. I remember sitting at my desk in the laboratory, staring out the window at Lake Michigan's endless expanse, while papers and research files piled up around me. My team buzzed with energy as we made progress on our clinical trials. For the first time in years, I felt a steady hum of pride, not the brittle kind I'd once sought from my family, but a grounded private satisfaction that no one could take away. Yet even in that space of accomplishment, I couldn't escape the presence of my family. Their absence was loud. The silence of my phone, once vibrating with their criticisms, demands, or dismissals, was now filled with desperate echoes, each message tugging at wounds I wasn't sure I wanted to heal. 3 months had passed since Thanksgiving, yet the consequences still rippled through every corner of their lives. My parents had sold their place in the luxury Florida retirement community, moving into a modest condominium. My father wrote to me in uncharacteristically humble words. We lived our lives chasing luxury, only to realize too late that it was hollow. We spoiled Catherine. We punished you. I see that now. I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness. I read his email slowly, my chest tightening with a confusing cocktail of anger and sorrow. I had wanted these words all my life, but now that they had come, I didn't know if they could heal anything. Words alone couldn't erase decades of cold shoulders and subtle cruelties. Still, there was a flicker of something in me, something that wanted to believe he meant it this time. My mother, too, was different. Her messages, once filled with passive-aggressive guilt, were stripped bare. Helen, were adjusting, cooking at home, paying bills carefully. I realize now how much of our security came from your grandfather, not from anything we earned. For the first time, I see how you lived all these years. It was strange. For so long, they had pitied me for being too independent, too alone. They had whispered to relatives about how sad it was that I didn't have a husband to rely on, or children to give me purpose. Now, I was the only one who didn't need rescuing. I was the only one standing on my own 2 feet. Catherine's unraveling was even more profound. Her emails were sparse, written with the brittle exhaustion of someone who no longer had the energy to perform. Amy is at public school now. She takes the school bus. I can't believe this is my life. I used to laugh at people who lived like this. The cruelty of her words stung, but beneath them was something unfamiliar humility. Perhaps it wasn't yet full recognition, but it was cracks in the mask she had worn all her life. Her husband called once more, his tone subdued. We're selling the cars. Downsizing. Catherine doesn't stop crying. But maybe this is what we needed. We were living a lie. I just don't know if our marriage will survive the truth. I listened, my silence steady on the other end of the line. He wasn't asking for advice. He wasn't even asking for help. He was simply confessing to someone who had always been invisible in their world, but who now stood outside the wreckage untouched. Meanwhile, I had received a small package from grandfather, the pearl necklace that now rested in my dresser drawer. Every time I looked at it, I heard his words again. True brilliance dwells in those who stand on their own feet. It was the only inheritance I truly needed, not money, not houses, not a false sense of superiority, but the strength to belong to myself. Still, I thought of Amy. More often than I admitted, I thought of her wide eyes in that hotel lobby, the way she had fidgeted behind her mother, silently searching for me. The pearl hair clip I had bought for her remained in my desk drawer, wrapped neatly in paper she had never torn open. Sometimes I would take it out, run my fingers over the smooth surface, and imagine the day she might be ready for it, not as a child dressed up like a doll, but as a young woman learning her own worth. It was Amy's message that haunted me most. Aunt Helen, when can I see you again? I had answered simply, soon. But that single word carried the weight of everything unspoken. Soon, but not yet. Soon, But not until I believed it wouldn't be another performance orchestrated by Catherine, another photo op for appearances. Soon, but only when I could look Amy in the eye and know that she was ready to see me, not as the sister her mother despised, not as the scapegoat her grandparents ignored, but as someone who loved her without condition. And then there were the unexpected ripples. Friends of my parents began to notice their absence from Florida's glittering social circles. Whispers spread. Catherine's once envied lifestyle became a cautionary tale among neighbors. For people who had lived their entire lives chasing the approval of others, this social death might have been even harder than the financial collapse. I didn't feel joy in their downfall. Not really. I felt something sharper, quieter justice. This wasn't revenge I had orchestrated, it was the inevitable weight of truth. One evening, as I walked home through Chicago's thawing streets, the city lights reflected in puddles of melted snow, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Did I miss them? The answer came slowly. I didn't miss their cruelty, their dismissals, their favoritism. But I missed the idea of family. I missed the version of parents who might have celebrated my achievements, the version of a sister who might have cheered for me instead of tearing me down. I missed the little girl Amy had been sitting on my lap during holidays, listening wide-eyed to stories I read her. Perhaps what I missed was not what had ever existed, but what I had always hoped for. That realization hurt more than any email, any phone call, any hotel lobby, humiliation. Because it meant the family I longed for had never truly been mine. But maybe, just maybe, it could still exist in a different form. Maybe through Amy. Maybe through the faint sparks of honesty now appearing in my parents' words. Maybe through the silence that forced Catherine to face herself without filters or hashtags. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness felt too large, too unearned. But it was the tiniest opening, the possibility of something different. As spring deepened, I found myself walking more, wandering along the lakefront, letting the cold wind whip against my face. I thought about the path ahead. I thought about the woman I had become, alone, yes, but strong, capable, unshaken. And I thought about the little girl waiting for me, still calling me Aunt Helen, still asking when. When the time was right, I knew I would see her again. Because no matter how much betrayal had poisoned our family, no matter how many secrets had been unmasked, no matter how much pain had been inflicted, there was one truth I couldn't deny: Amy deserved to learn what it meant to stand on her own feet. And I was determined to show her. By the time summer began to warm Chicago, the distance between me and my family felt both infinite and fragile. On the surface, we lived in separate worlds now, mine built on work savings and quiet independence, theirs struggling to adjust to a reality stripped of illusions. And yet, invisible threads still tied us together, threads woven not by Catherine's arrogance or my parents' neglect, but by something older, deeper, harder to destroy. Blood, history, memory. I hadn't answered most of their messages. For months, my inbox was a graveyard of pleas, apologies, rationalizations. But slowly, a change began to emerge. The frantic calls dwindled, replaced by shorter emails, less frequent, almost humbled. And one morning, as sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, I opened a message from my mother that stopped me cold. Helen, your father and I have moved into a smaller condo. We go for walks every morning. We cook our meals together. It's strange, but in these simple routines, I feel something I never felt in all those years of luxury. A kind of peace. I wanted to tell you that I finally understand what you were trying to show us, living life the way you did. I'm sorry it took losing everything for us to see it. I read those words again and again, searching for hidden barbs, waiting for the manipulation I had come to expect. But it wasn't there. For the first time in decades, my mother sounded human, vulnerable, honest. My father's messages mirrored hers. No more pride, no more defense, just quiet acknowledgement. We were wrong. We know it. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day we can sit at a table together again, not as the family we pretended to be, but as the family we might still become. The tears came before I could stop them. I pressed my palms to my face, the sound of my own sobs startling me in the quiet of my apartment. Because this was the apology I had needed all my life. And yet, hearing it now, I realized something: forgiveness would not be a single moment, but a journey. A journey I wasn't sure I was ready to walk. Catherine was different. Her silence stretched the longest, broken only by rare halting emails. Everything feels empty now. I used to measure my worth by handbags and likes, but none of it means anything. I see that now, but I don't know who I am without it. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. For Catherine, who had lived behind filters and designer labels her whole life, even admitting emptiness was monumental. And then one day, Amy's name appeared on my phone again. A video this time. She was sitting in her new bedroom, walls bare except for a few crayon drawings. She held up the phone awkwardly, her face filling the frame. "Aunt Helen," she said, her voice trembling a little. "I miss you. Mom cries a lot. Dad yells sometimes. But I just wanted to say, I love you, and I can't wait to see you. My hands shook as I replayed it again and again. The rawness of her voice, the innocence in her eyes, it pierced me deeper than all the manipulations, all the betrayals, all the years of being forgotten. In that moment, I knew. Whatever else happened with Catherine, with my parents, with the fractured remains of our family, I could not abandon Amy. She deserved better. She deserved someone who would show her that love wasn't conditional, that worth wasn't measured in possessions, that family could mean something truer than performance. So I began to write back, slowly, cautiously, but consistently. Short emails, texts, little notes to Amy. I didn't re-engage with Catherine directly, not yet, but I created a thread for Amy, a lifeline that connected us across the miles. One weekend in July, I boarded a plane to Florida. My stomach twisted with nerves as I walked through the airport, suitcase in hand, my mind replaying that hotel lobby humiliation. I wasn't going back to reconcile. I wasn't going back to pretend the past hadn't happened. I was going back for Amy. When I stepped into the modest suburban house Catherine now called home, it was surreal. Gone were the gilded chandeliers, the marble floors, the rows of handbags displayed like trophies. The walls were plain. The furniture mismatched the air, heavy with a silence that spoke louder than any luxury ever could. Amy was the first to run to me. She flung her arms around my waist, burying her face against me. "You came," she whispered, her small voice cracking. I knelt, holding her tightly, and in that moment every ounce of bitterness in me melted. Not forgiveness, not for Catherine, not yet, but love. Fierce, protective love for this child who had been born into a family of illusions, but who still had a chance to learn truth. Catherine stood in this doorway watching us. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from tears. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with years of pain. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on her." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Words would have broken the fragile truce hanging in the air. But I nodded just once, and that was enough. The weekend passed quietly. We baked cookies, we walked in the park. Amy showed me her school books and drawings. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace in the presence of my family. Not because everything had been healed, but because something small, something fragile had begun to grow. When I left, Amy slipped a note into my hand. It was written in her crooked handwriting. "Don't forget me. I'll wait for you." On the plane back to Chicago, I held that note against my chest, tears streaming silently down my face. Life went on. My work continued. Promotions, research milestones, steady progress. But now, woven into my days, was the thread of connection to Amy. Emails, phone calls, visits when I could. Each one reminded me that even in a family poisoned by betrayal, innocence could survive. Grandfather wrote to me once more, before he passed, his words a kind of benediction. "Necessary pain teaches us who we are. You endured it. You chose truth. That is your strength. Guard it well and pass it on." When he died, there was no inheritance for Catherine, none for my parents. His estate, modest by the end, went to charity, just as he had told me it would. But the necklace, the pearls remained with me, and so did his words. Today, when I look back, I don't see myself as the daughter left without a hotel room. I see myself as the woman who finally stood on her own feet, who refused to be defined by cruelty, who found strength in solitude. And though my family may never fully heal, though forgiveness may remain out of reach, I know this: Amy will not grow up believing that worth is measured in handbags or likes. She will grow up knowing the truth, because I will make sure of it. And maybe that is the quiet revenge, the lasting karma that in the end, the lessons I bled for will become her inheritance. Because love, real love, is stronger than betrayal. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of betrayal and the hope of healing, I invite you to stay with me. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about your own story, your own lessons. And don't forget to like and subscribe so together we can keep exploring these truths that bind and break us. Sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones we tell others, but the ones we finally allow ourselves to hear.